The Galactic Concordance had existed for 10,000 cycles, and in all that time, they had never known true fear. 12 species shared the stars in harmony, trading knowledge and resources across 100,000 worlds. Their cities gleamed with crystal towers, and their ships sailed through space like silver fish swimming through an ocean of darkness. They believed they had seen everything the universe had to offer. But in the oldest archives, hidden away in dusty corners where few dared to look, there existed stories that made even the bravest warriors tremble. These were the tales of the Terrans, the humans, the Deathworlders. Elder Vashkith stood before the Grand Assembly on this particular day, his crystalline body catching the light of 3 distant suns that shone through the great windows of the chamber. He was old, even by the standards of his long-lived species, and he had spent centuries studying the ancient texts. "My fellow members of the Concordance," he announced in his resonating voice, "I must address the foolish superstitions that continue to spread among our younger generations." The assembled delegates from all 12 species leaned forward in their seats, curious about what the elder would say. "The humans are myths," Vashkith declared with absolute certainty. "They are nothing more than bedtime stories, created to frighten children into behaving properly. The idea that any sentient species could evolve on a Class 12 death world is scientifically impossible." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Everyone knew the classification system for planets, and Class 12 was the most dangerous category that existed. Such worlds had extreme temperatures, violent weather, toxic atmospheres, and predators that could tear through metal. "Consider what the legends claim," the elder continued, waving one of his many limbs dismissively. "They say humans breathe oxygen, a gas so corrosive that it can rust metal and fuel fires. They say human blood contains iron, one of the most toxic metals in the periodic table. They say humans evolved on a world where water falls from the sky in deadly torrents and the ground itself shakes and splits open." Laughter echoed through the assembly. When stated so plainly, the myths did sound ridiculous. "And we are supposed to believe," Vashkith added with a tone of mockery, "that these impossible creatures not only survived such a hellish environment but actually thrived there. That they domesticated predators with fangs the size of daggers. That they conquered their world and then reached for the stars." "Absurd," the delegates applauded, satisfied that reason had prevailed once again over silly superstition. But not everyone in the galaxy shared the elder's certainty. On the distant fringe world of Kethvala, far from the gleaming cities and grand assemblies of the core worlds, an old merchant named Yumri sat alone in her cluttered shop. Her scales had faded with age from bright blue to a dull gray, and her 4 eyes were clouded with the weight of many years. But her mind remained sharp, sharper than many half her. Jen, she held in her wrinkled hands an object that she had never shown to anyone. A circular disc made of a golden metal that no scientist had been able to identify. Strange symbols covered its surface, and attached to it was a device that her best equipment could not decode. Yimri had found this artifact 50 cycles ago, in the ruins of a dead system at the very edge of known space. It was a place where no living species had ever traveled, a region of burned-out stars and shattered planets. But someone had been there before her. She had seen the evidence with her own eyes. Massive words carved into the surface of a lifeless moon. Words in a language that matched no known species. In the Concordance, the letters were each 100 meters tall, and they spelled out a message that her translators could not decipher. The disc was warm in her hands, as it always was. Sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night cycle when her shop was empty and the streets outside were silent, she could swear she heard it humming. A soft melody that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "They are out there," she whispered to herself, as she did every night. "They have always been out there, watching us, waiting for something. I do not know what they want, but I know they are real. Her neighbors thought she was crazy. Her family had stopped visiting years ago. The scientific community had dismissed her findings as the delusions of a senile old woman. But Yimri knew what she had seen, and no amount of ridicule could make her doubt her own eyes. Across the galaxy, in 1,000 different places, there were others like her, historians who had found strange gaps in the ancient records, astronomers who had detected unexplained signals from beyond the barrier, explorers who had stumbled upon ruins that predated every known civilization. They whispered to each other in secret networks, sharing their findings and their theories. They called themselves the Seekers, and they believed that the truth about the humans was being deliberately hidden. The Concordance does not want us to know, they would say to each other in encrypted messages. They are afraid of what we might discover, but the truth cannot be hidden forever. The barrier was the key to everything. A vast region of gravitational anomalies and dead stars that surrounded the known galaxy like a wall. No ship had ever crossed it and returned. It was considered the absolute edge of the universe, the point beyond which nothing could exist. But the Seekers had noticed something strange. The barrier was not natural. Its gravitational patterns were too regular, too precise, too perfect. It had been engineered by someone, built millions of years ago for a purpose that no one could guess. It is not a wall, the Seekers believed. It is a door, and something is on the other side. They were right, though. They could never have imagined the truth. Beyond the barrier, in the vast emptiness between galaxies where no star shone and no planet turned, something was moving. Thousands of massive shapes, each one larger than any ship the Concordance had ever built, traveling through the darkness with determination. That had lasted for centuries. They had names painted on their hulls in a language the galaxy had forgotten. Endurance, perseverance, hope, unity, new dawn, second chance. They were the children of a dying world, the refugees of a doomed star, the last survivors of a species that had refused to accept extinction. They were humanity, and after 400 years of traveling through the endless void, they had finally arrived. The myths were about to become reality, and the Galactic Concordance would never be the same again. The distress call came without warning, shattering the peace that the Galactic Concordance had enjoyed for so many centuries. It originated from Vareth Mining Colony, a small outpost on a frozen moon at the very edge of civilized space. The colony was home to only 3,000 workers who spent their days extracting rare minerals from the ice. It was a quiet place, far from the politics and drama of the core worlds. But on this day, the quiet was broken by screaming. This is Colony Administrator Threshka calling for immediate assistance. The transmission crackled through static and interference. Something is happening. Our sensors are detecting ships, hundreds of ships, emerging from beyond the barrier. The operator who received the message at Central Command nearly fell out of her chair. Beyond the barrier was impossible. Nothing could survive in that void. Nothing could cross that distance. Administrator Threshka, please repeat your message, she responded with trembling hands. Did you say ships are coming from beyond the barrier? Yes, that is what I said. The administrator's voice was breaking with terror. They are massive, bigger than anything I have ever seen. There are so many of them. The sky is filling with their shadows. The transmission dissolved into static and then went silent. Within hours, the news had spread across the entire Concordance. Emergency assemblies were called on every homeworld. Military commanders were pulled from their beds. Scientists abandoned their research to gather around sensor screens. Commander Desha of the Vorn peacekeeping fleet was given command of the response mission. She was considered the finest military mind of her generation, a tactical genius who had resolved a dozen conflicts without firing a single shot. Her scales were the deep purple of nobility, and her eyes held the calm confidence of someone who had never faced a situation she could not handle. She gathered a fleet of 50 warships, the finest vessels in the Concordance Navy, each one equipped with the most advanced weapons and shields that technology could provide. They were beautiful ships, sleek and elegant, designed as much for ceremony as for combat. "We are probably dealing with pirates," she told her officers as they prepared for departure. "Perhaps a rogue faction from one of the outer systems has developed new stealth technology. Whatever this is, we will handle it with our usual efficiency." Her confidence lasted until she saw them. The Vorn fleet emerged from hyperspace above Vareth Colony to find themselves facing something that defied all understanding. The ships that hung in the void before them were unlike anything in any database, any historical record, any nightmare. They were massive, each one stretching for kilometers, and there were thousands of them filling the space around the frozen moon. Their hulls were made of dark metal, covered in scars and patches that spoke of countless battles survived. There were no curves, no elegance, no beauty in their design. They were built for one purpose, and one purpose only: to endure. Commander Desha stared at her view screen with her mouth hanging open. In all her years of service, she had never felt fear like this. The sheer scale of what she was seeing overwhelmed every tactical calculation in her mind. "What are they?" one of her officers whispered. "Where did they come from?" Before anyone could answer, every communication channel in the fleet was suddenly filled with a transmission. It was a voice, speaking in a language that the universal translators struggled to decode. "This is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Earth Expeditionary Fleet," the voice said, and though it was calm and measured, there was something in it that made every alien in the Vorn fleet shiver. "We have traveled for 400 years to find you. We come in peace, but we are prepared for war. Please respond." The translators finally caught up with the strange language, cross-referencing it against every known dialect in the Concordance database. There were no matches in the active files, so the system dug deeper, searching through archived data that had not been accessed in millennia. When the result appeared on Commander Desha's screen, she felt her blood turn to ice. Language identified. Terran English classification. Mythological, extinct warning. Data corrupted, incomplete. Gods of the void. Desha whispered, her voice barely audible. "The humans are real." The news spread through the fleet like fire through dry grass. Crew members abandoned their stations to stare at the view screens. Some fell to their knees in terror. Others began to pray to deities they had not believed in since childhood. Every story they had dismissed, every legend they had laughed at, every nightmare that had haunted their ancestors for 10,000 cycles was now hanging in space before them, real and solid and undeniable. Commander Desha forced herself to take a deep breath and regain control of her emotions. She was a commander, and her crew was looking to her for guidance. She could not afford to panic. "Open a channel," she ordered, her voice steady despite the fear that churned in her stomach. "I will speak with this Admiral Vance." The view screen flickered, and suddenly Desha found herself looking at a human for the first time. The creature that appeared before her was smaller than she had expected, covered in soft skin without scales or shell. Its head was topped with gray fibers that might have been hair or fur. Two small eyes looked out from a face that was surprisingly expressive. But it was those eyes that captured Desha's attention. They were not the eyes of a monster or a demon. They were tired eyes, the eyes of someone who had seen too much and traveled too far. They were the eyes of a survivor. "I am Commander Desha of the Galactic Concordance Peacekeeping Fleet," she said, trying to keep her voice from shaking. "We received a distress call from the colony on this moon. May I ask what your intentions are in this space?" Admiral Helena Vance smiled, and it was a strange expression on that alien face, both warm and somehow sad at the same time. "Commander Desha, my intentions are simple," she replied. "My people have been traveling through the darkness between galaxies for 400 years. We have lost count of how many of us died along the way. We have faced every hardship the universe could throw at us, and we have survived." The Admiral paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of centuries. "We are not here to conquer you. We are not here to destroy you. We are here because we have nowhere else to go. Our homeworld is gone, swallowed by our dying sun. We are the last of our kind, and we are asking, with whatever humility we can muster, for a place to call home." Commander Desha did not know what to say. This was not what she had expected. This was not what any of the legends had prepared her for. The humans were not invaders. They were refugees. But as she looked at the vast fleet that surrounded her ships, at the thousands of vessels that had crossed the impossible void, she understood something that the Concordants had forgotten long ago. A species that could survive 400 years in the darkness between galaxies, that could endure unimaginable hardship and still keep going, that could lose their homeworld and refuse to accept extinction. Such a species was far more dangerous than any conqueror. Such a species was humanity. On every homeworld, governments called emergency meetings that lasted through the night. Military forces were placed on highest alert. Civilians gathered around news broadcasts, watching with wide eyes as the impossible became reality. The humans were real, and they were here. In the great libraries and archives of the 12 species, scholars worked frantically to dig up every scrap of information about the Terrans. They searched through files that had been sealed for millennia, uncovering records that previous generations had dismissed as fantasy. What they found made them tremble. The ancient texts described a species unlike any other in the known universe. Humans had evolved on a world that should have killed them 1,000 times over. Their planet was covered in water that could crush the strongest metal at its depths. Their atmosphere was filled with oxygen, a gas so reactive that it could fuel devastating fires. The climate of their world shifted constantly, bringing floods and droughts, heat waves, and ice ages. The ground shook with earthquakes and exploded with volcanoes. Giant rocks fell from the sky with enough force to end entire civilizations. And yet the humans had not merely survived. They had thrived. They had developed intelligence and competition with predators that made the most dangerous creatures in concordant space look like gentle pets. They had learned to use fire, the same fire that could destroy forests and consume cities, as a tool for survival. They had spread across their deadly world and conquered every environment it offered. "This cannot be accurate," Elder Vashkith muttered as he read through the ancient files. No species could survive such conditions. The mathematics of evolution simply do not allow for it. But the evidence was undeniable, and the Elder's certainty began to crumble like ancient stone. Aboard the flagship Endurance, Admiral Helena Vance prepared for the most important meeting in human history. She stood before a mirror in her quarters, straightening the uniform she had worn for so many decades. Her face was lined with age and worry, and her hair had turned completely gray during the long journey. But her eyes remained sharp, the eyes of a woman who had never stopped fighting. "Admiral," her aide Commander Chun spoke from the doorway. "The Concordance delegation will arrive within the hour. Are you ready?" "I have been ready for 400 years," Vance replied without turning around. "My grandmother was born on this fleet, and she dreamed of this day. My mother was born on this fleet, and she dreamed of this day. I am the first in my family who will see it happen." She turned to face him, and there was something fierce in her expression. "We crossed the impossible void, Chen. We watched our sun die through telescopes. We buried generation after generation in the cold darkness between galaxies. We lost half our population to disease and despair and madness. Her voice rose with emotion that she usually kept hidden. And we kept going because that is what humans do. We do not know how to give up. We do not know how to accept defeat. We look at the impossible and we say, "Watch me." Commander Chen nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. He too had been born on the fleet, had grown up hearing stories of a homeworld he would never see. He too had dreamed of this day. The delegation from the Concordance arrived in a shuttle that seemed ridiculously small compared to the massive human vessels. 5 representatives from 5 different species stepped onto the deck of the Endurance, their eyes wide with fear and wonder. They had never seen anything like this ship. The corridors were functional and plain, decorated not with art or beauty, but with photographs and memorials to the dead. Names were inscribed on every wall. Thousands upon thousands of names, each one representing a life spent in the darkness. "These are your ancestors?" one of the delegates asked, gesturing at the endless lists of names. Admiral Vance nodded solemnly. "These are the ones who did not live to see this day. We carry their names with us so that they will not be forgotten. They made this journey possible through their sacrifice." The delegates exchanged glances. They came from species that lived for centuries, that had never faced the specter of extinction. The concept of sacrificing generations for a goal that might never be achieved was alien to them. The meeting took place in what the humans called the Hall of Memory, a vast chamber at the heart of the flagship. Holographic displays showed images of Earth, the homeworld that none of the current generation had ever seen. Blue oceans, green forests, towering mountains, sprawling cities. "We did not choose to leave," Admiral Vance explained to the assembled delegates. "Our sun was dying. We had perhaps 500 years before it would expand and consume our world. Our scientists searched for solutions, but there were none that could save our planet." She gestured at the images of Earth, and her voice grew heavy with ancient grief. "We had 2 choices. We could stay and die with our world, or we could build ships and sail into the unknown. Our ancestors chose to live. They gathered the best of our species, the strongest and the smartest and the bravest, and they launched themselves into the void." 400 years, one of the delegates whispered. "You have been traveling for 400 years? Longer for some of us," Vance replied. "The fleet has 1,200 ships. Not all of them travel at the same speed. Some of our vessels were launched centuries before the others. Some arrived here years ago and have been waiting in the outer systems for the rest of us to catch up." The delegates were stunned. The logistics of such an operation were beyond anything they could imagine. Keeping a civilization alive across centuries of travel through the emptiness between galaxies was a feat that should have been impossible. "How did you survive?" Commander Desha asked. She had been invited to join the delegation after her initial contact with the humans. The distances involved, the resources required, the psychological toll. "How did your species endure?" Admiral Vance smiled, but there was pain behind the expression. "We almost did not. There were times when we wanted to give up, when the darkness seemed endless and hope seemed foolish. We had mutinies and plagues and disasters that killed thousands. We had generations who were born in the void and died in the void without ever seeing a sun." She paused, gathering herself before continuing. "But we also had something that kept us going. We had stories. We told our children about Earth, about blue skies and green grass and warm rain. We taught them songs and dances and traditions that were thousands of years old. We kept our culture alive even when we had lost everything else." The Admiral stood tall, her voice ringing with pride. "We are human. We adapt, we survive, we endure. You may have thought we were myths, but myths are just truths that have been forgotten. We are here now, and we are ready to write the next chapter of our story." The delegates did not know how to respond. They had come expecting monsters or invaders. Instead, They had found survivors, refugees who had crossed the impossible and were asking only for a chance to live. For the first time in 10,000 cycles, the Galactic Concordance faced a question it did not know how to answer. What do you do when the myths come to life? Some delegates argued for immediate alliance. The refugees had crossed the impossible void and deserved respect and assistance. Others demanded caution. The legends painted humans as dangerous beyond measure, and perhaps those legends existed for a reason. High Arbiter Cosvin of the ruling council listened to both sides with growing frustration. His species, the Vreth, had built their culture on strength and discipline. They did not like uncertainty, and they did not like waiting. "We will test them," he announced when the debates had gone on long enough. "The Crucible has evaluated every species that wished to join the Concordance. The humans will face it as well." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembly. The Crucible was an ancient tradition, a combat trial that measured a species' worthiness through challenge and hardship. No one had ever questioned its fairness or its difficulty. Admiral Vance received the news with calm acceptance. "We understand," she told the Concordance delegation. "You do not know us, and trust must be earned. Send us your Crucible, and we will show you what humanity can do." The Crucible was built on an artificial moon that orbited a dead star. It was a maze of corridors and chambers, filled with traps and automated weapons designed to adapt to any strategy. The machines inside learned from every attack, growing smarter and more deadly with each passing moment. No species had ever completed the Crucible with fewer than 40% casualties. Most lost more than half their warriors to the merciless machines. It was designed not to destroy but to humble, to remind newcomers that the Concordance was greater than any single species. The humans sent 100 soldiers into the Crucible, led by a woman named Captain Sarah Rodriguez. She was young by human standards, barely 40 years old, but she had trained her entire life for moments like this. "Remember your training," she told her team as they entered the maze. "We work together, we watch each other's backs, we adapt faster than the enemy. That is how we survived 400 years in the void. That is how we will survive this." The Concordance observers watched from a control room high above the maze, expecting to see the usual pattern. Initial success followed by mounting casualties as the machines learned and adapted. What they saw instead made them question everything they thought they knew. The humans moved through the maze like water flowing through cracks. They communicated with hand signals and whispered codes, coordinating their movements with a precision that seemed almost supernatural. When they encountered traps, they did not just avoid them. They dismantled them and used the parts to build their own devices. "They are improvising weapons," one observer noted with disbelief. "They are turning our own technology against us." When the machines adapted to the humans' tactics, the humans adapted faster. When the maze shifted to separate the team, they regrouped within minutes. When energy barriers blocked their path, they found ways around or through or under. 6 hours after they entered, all 100 soldiers emerged from the exit. They were tired and bruised, but every single one of them was alive. 0 casualties. It was unprecedented. It was impossible. Captain Rodriguez stood before the stunned observers and saluted with military precision. "The Crucible is complete," she announced. "Do you require any further demonstration?" High Arbiter Cosvin stared at the human woman with something that might have been fear or might have been hatred. "How did you do this?" he demanded. "The machines learn from every tactic. They should have overwhelmed you." Rodriguez smiled, and there was something fierce in her expression. "Your machines learn from success," she replied. "They study what works and develop counters. But humans learn from failure. Every mistake we make teaches us something new. We have had 10,000 years of failures, and we have learned from every single one. The Concordance declared the humans worthy of membership. They were granted a single colony world, a modest planet on the edge of civilized space. It was a generous offer by Concordance standards, but some did not agree with the decision. Cosvin returned to his homeworld with anger burning in his heart. The Vreth had once been the mightiest warriors in the galaxy. They had conquered dozens of worlds before joining the Concordance and accepting its laws of peace. They did not like being shown up by newcomers. "These humans are a threat," he told his followers in secret meetings. "They are too capable, too adaptable, too dangerous. If we do not act now, they will eventually dominate the entire galaxy." He gathered allies from other factions who shared his concerns, species who felt threatened by the humans' arrival, politicians who feared losing power, warriors who longed for the glory days of conquest. Together, they assembled a fleet in secret, 40 warships armed with the most powerful weapons in the Concordance arsenal. It was the largest unsanctioned military force in galactic history. They struck the human colony without warning, descending from hyperspace with weapons blazing. Their plan was simple: destroy the colony before the humans could respond, then blame the attack on pirates or rogue elements. The plan failed within the first 5 minutes. The human colony was not defenseless. Admiral Vance had anticipated exactly this kind of attack. She had hidden warships in the asteroid field around the planet, camouflaged and waiting. "All vessels engage," she commanded when the attack began. "Protect the colony at all costs." The battle that followed would become legendary throughout the galaxy. The Concordance ships had superior technology, faster engines, stronger shields, more advanced weapons. By every measure, they should have won easily. But technology was not enough against an enemy that simply refused to lose. Human ships dove into the heart of the enemy formation, ignoring damage that would have destroyed any other vessel. Their pilots performed maneuvers that should have been suicidal, using asteroids as cover and gravity wells as weapons. They fought with a ferocity that the Concordance had never encountered. "They are not afraid," one of Cosvin's captains reported with horror in his voice. "We have destroyed half their shields, and they are still attacking. What is wrong with these creatures?" 3 hours after the attack began, 38 of the 40 Concordance ships were drifting wreckage. The remaining 2 fled into hyperspace, broadcasting warnings on every frequency. "Do not attack the humans," the surviving captain screamed. "Do not provoke the humans. Do not mistake their kindness for weakness." The footage from the battle spread across the galaxy within days. Everyone saw what the humans were capable of: soldiers who smiled in combat, pilots who laughed in the face of death, warriors who treated impossible odds as an interesting challenge. Admiral Vance broadcast a message to the entire Concordance. "We did not come here for war," she declared. "We came here for peace. But if you force us to fight, we will fight. We have survived the death of our son. We have survived 400 years in the darkness. We will survive whatever you throw at us." She paused, and her voice grew cold. "So I suggest very strongly that you do not throw anything." The Galactic Concordance received the message loud and clear. The humans were not to be tested again. 5 cycles had passed since the humans arrived, and the galaxy had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Galactic Concordance had expected conquest. They had prepared for war. They had braced themselves for the violence that the ancient legends promised. Instead, the humans gave them something far more valuable. They gave them gifts. Medical technology flowed from human laboratories, treatments for diseases that the Concordance had accepted as incurable. Humans had spent millennia fighting against death, and they had developed weapons in that war that worked on species they had never even imagined. Agricultural techniques tripled food production on worlds that had struggled with famine for centuries. Humans had learned to grow crops in the harshest environments, from frozen tundras to scorching deserts. They shared this knowledge freely with anyone who asked. Engineering innovations made ships faster and safer. Construction methods made buildings stronger. Energy systems made power cheaper and cleaner. Everything humans touched seemed to become better. Why are you doing this? The delegates asked at every meeting. Why are you sharing your secrets with us? What do you want in return? Admiral Vance, now serving as humanity's ambassador to the Concordance, always gave the same answer. We spent 400 years alone in the darkness. We had no one to trade with, no one to learn from, no one to share with. That loneliness nearly destroyed us. Now that we have found others, we do not want to be alone again. She smiled with genuine warmth. Besides, helping others is what humans do. We are at our best when we are working together towards something greater than ourselves. Not everyone in the Concordance understood this philosophy. Some species had evolved in competition, fighting for resources against rivals. The concept of cooperation without immediate reward was strange to them. But slowly, over cycles of contact and exchange, they began to understand. Humans were not just giving away technology. They were teaching the Concordance how to think differently. They introduced concepts that had never occurred to species who had never faced existential threats. Plan for the worst, humans advised. Hope for the best, but always have a backup plan. The universe is not cruel, but it is indifferent. You must be prepared to save yourselves. Embrace failure, humans encouraged. Every mistake is a lesson. Every setback is an opportunity. The only true defeat is giving up. Take care of each other, humans insisted. No individual can survive alone. No species can thrive in isolation. We are all connected, and we all need each other. These ideas spread through the Concordance like seeds in fertile soil, growing into movements and philosophies that would reshape galactic civilization. Old merchant Yumri finally got to show her artifact to human experts. They identified it immediately as a Voyager Golden Record, a message in a bottle that humanity had cast into the void long before they had even left their solar system. You sent this before you knew we existed, Yumri said, her aged voice trembling with emotion. You had no proof that anyone was out there. Why would you do such a thing? Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, the young scientist who examined the disk, looked up with tears in her eyes. Because we hoped, she replied. We always hoped. Even when the evidence said we were alone, even when the math said no one would ever find this message, we hoped anyway. She held the ancient disk carefully, as if it were the most precious thing in the universe. That is what makes us human. We believe in things we cannot see. We work toward goals we may never reach. We send messages into the darkness because we cannot accept the idea that no one is listening. Yumri understood then what made the humans truly special. It was not their technology or their strength or their stubborn refusal to die. It was their capacity for hope, their ability to believe in a better tomorrow even when today was filled with suffering. The Galactic Concordance had spent 10,000 cycles building a civilization based on caution and stability. They avoided risks. They maintained traditions. They kept things the same because change was dangerous. The humans brought a different message. Change was not dangerous. Change was necessary. The only way to grow was to reach for something you could not yet grasp. Admiral Helena Vance gave her final address to the Grand Assembly before retiring from public service. She was old now, older than most humans ever lived, and she was ready to rest. My people have a saying, she told the assembled delegates from all 12 species. It is better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. She paused, letting the words sink in. For 400 years, We traveled through the darkest darkness imaginable. There was nothing around us but void, nothing ahead of us but uncertainty, nothing behind us but the ashes of our homeworld. Our voice grew stronger, but we kept our candles lit. We told our stories and sang our songs. We taught our children to dream. We refused to let the darkness into our hearts. She looked around the chamber at the faces of species she had once known only as myths. You thought we were legends. You thought we were impossible. But here we are, alive and stubborn, and ready to build something new. She smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who had seen her life's work completed. We are not your conquerors. We are not your saviors. We are your neighbors, your partners, your friends. We want to learn from you as much as we want to teach you. She raised her hand in a gesture of farewell. The darkness between galaxies could not stop us. The death of our sun could not stop us. 400 years of hardship could not stop us. And neither will the challenges ahead. She stepped back from the podium, and the chamber erupted in applause that lasted for hours. In the archives of the Galactic Concordance, the old myths were rewritten. The humans were no longer monsters to frighten children. They were heroes who had crossed the impossible void. They were survivors who had refused to accept extinction. They were dreamers who had turned hope into reality. The galaxy had thought humans were myths. Now the galaxy would never forget them. For the humans had brought something more valuable than technology, more powerful than weapons, more lasting than any empire. They had brought the audacious, irrational, beautiful belief that tomorrow could be better than today, and the stubborn, unbreakable will to make it so. They were humanity. They had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same. This was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. A new dawn was rising across 100,000 worlds, and it was bright with the light of human hope.